So a while back, we did a podcast covering a book called Catch Me If You Can. I don't know whether you've read this one. If you haven't, shame on you. Go and get Catch Me If You Can by a very famous athlete called Philbert Bailly. Philbert at one time held the world record. Being an old guy, I'm sort of, everybody knows Philbert Bailly, but all you young people out there are probably saying, who is this boomer talking about this ancient athlete? Well, Philbert Bailly, at one time, he held a world record for the 1500 meters and the mile. A phenomenal middle distance runner. And at the time, the thing that was interesting about him, as in particular, was at the time he transformed top level racing, and he transformed it because he became one of the only guys who would just go out hard from the beginning and run the legs off his opposition. So in the 70s, when he was world record holder, this was an unheard of tactic. Everybody was a sit and kick or a wait and kick type of runner. And this took, phenomenal amount of, ability, but also courage and endurance for Philbert Bailly to dominate the world scene at the time, becoming a type of runner that people hadn't seen before. And this was the very first time I heard the term front runner. Someone who takes on the competition from the beginning and dares them to stay with the pace. And today's story is going to feature just one of these kind of people. Hi, and welcome to Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review books written for runners, about runners, and by runners to help you decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We also hope listening to us chat about running can help keep you motivated about your own running, or maybe inspire you to try something new. My name's Alan, and with my co-host Liz, we're going to talk today with author Brad Fawley about his book, The Frontrunner.
The Frontrunner is a fictional coming-of-age story about a boy named Russ who grows up without a mother and loses his father to cancer when he's barely an adult. He grows up running everywhere and later finds out that running can bring much more to his life. On the other side of the world in Russia, twin brothers are taken from their parents to participate in the country's sports program designed to make them into the best distance runners in the world. Eventually, these three athletes race each other, but not before they've had a chance to grow up and fight a few internal battles along the way. A little bit about Brad. Brad Fawley started running in 7th grade. He was a small college All-American in cross country and the 5,000 meter. After earning a master's degree in oceanography and his law degree from the University of Virginia, Brad practices law as an intellectual property and environmental litigator and has learned the value of storytelling. He has been awarded 3 U.S. patents for automotive tools. Brad and his wife split their time between Vermont and California, and blessed with good genes and knees, most every morning you can find him either outside running or working on his next book. So welcome to the podcast, Brad.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
So that was a wide variety of experiences you've had, and I guess it's a little bit related that you ended up writing a book yourself because, you have some experience in intellectual property. But how did you decide to write the book?
Well, during COVID, I had a little bit more time on my hands, and I've been writing my whole life, but never undertook the task of completing like a novel or a screenplay or anything of significance, or trying to get it published. But it occurred to me that there are very few fictional movies about runners. Almost every great movie about runners has to do with real life characters, and what comes to mind is, of course, Chariots of Fire. Um, and I felt like there should be one, and I envisioned a character in a movie that had people running in vast stadiums with screaming crowds and running across the Serengeti and training in the desert and all these great imagery of what the movie could be. So I decided to write a screenplay. My wife is an actor. And it was nice to have her because she's read a lot of screenplays and used a lot of screenplays. So it was fun to collaborate together to get this screenplay written. And I did it, and I showed it to her, and she said, "This is great, but where are the characters?" I had all this great imagery and these races and competition and everything. So I dove back in and spent more time doing character development. It turned out that was what I loved more than anything. And I ended up with a screenplay, and I shared it with a screenplay writer, a guy named Hawk Ostby, who is a pretty famous screenplay writer. He did Children of Men, Iron Man, The Last Vermeer, and some other movies you may be familiar with. And he was nice enough to read it. And we had dinner one night and we were talking about the screenplay writing business. And he said that I'd be disappointed if it ever got made into a movie because the director and the actors and the screenplay writers would change everything. And
Oh,
the story would never come out the way that I had originally envisioned. So it occurred to me I should change it into a novel. And then if I could get the novel published, then it would be difficult for the movie, if it ever got made, which is like a moonshot, either getting the novel published or making a movie out of it. But if it ever got made into a movie, it would be difficult to change the story significantly because it would already be out there. So I took the screenplay and I transformed it into a novel. And that, I have to say, besides my children and my wife, has been the joy of my life to do that. It was so much fun to dive into the interiority of each of the characters and learn how they related to each other, which was something that the screenplay really didn't allow because you don't get into the minds so much of the characters in a movie as you do in a novel.
that is true. And I mean, you kind of started to talk about it, but like, what was it about fiction, that, that particularly sparked your interest?
Well, I always love to read fiction. My most favorite books are fiction. I do like to read nonfiction, but I didn't feel like covering someone who was already famous as a runner and trying to write a story about them because I felt it would constrain creativity and where the book could go. And as the book was being written, I was able to go into areas that were inspiring for me. And I was learning as I was writing this thing that there was a lot about me and about my relationship with my son, my relationship as a son. I've done some coaching, so the relationship between my coaches and me being a coach, the familial story. I didn't lose my mother, but I was able to talk about some of these more difficult issues. And I also learned that the book turned out to be kind of an exploration for me of what might have been in my life if I had continued training at the level I was training at college and continued that until, I was 30 or in my early 30s when, age would start slowing me down. And instead, by choice, I let a career and school and other things get in the way, and I never really did find out how fast I could be and what the limits were. So the book was, as you know, since you've read it, there are parts of it where, or maybe one of the major themes of it is trying to find out what your limits are, how to run from the front and not be afraid or look back at your past, but only to try to find out how far and fast you can go.
Do you take caffeine when you run? Lots of people do because it's in gels and stuff. And caffeine's legal and it's been proven to work. There's actual science that shows that it improves your endurance running performance.
And there's anecdotal data from when you have your coffee in the morning and you go for a workout versus when you forgot to have your coffee or you didn't have time and you went for a workout and it was terrible.
And the trouble with coffee is there's a lot of liquid just to get your caffeine dose.
Yeah, so then you have to stop for the bathroom mid-workout. Very impractical. Which is where Caffeine Bullet comes in.
What's caffeine bullet, Liz?
It's a caffeine supplement. It's wrapped up like in a candy. So, and it tastes like candy. And you can get 100 milligrams or 85 milligrams, which is about a cup of coffee, but without the liquid.
So we've tried the mint flavor and the chocolate orange flavor, and they're both pretty yummy.
If you want to try them for yourself, we do have a 20% off discount code. So go to the link in the show notes and you can check out what Caffeine Bullet is and get your 20% discount.
Pretty generous.
It is pretty generous.
And we'll get a small benefit, so you're helping out the
Speaking of which, back to the podcast.
Yeah, in terms of limits, I guess we can go into it a bit, but I mean, we initially are looking at physical limits because the characters are learning how to do their craft, and then we get into mental limits, and then it gets
Messy.
yes, it gets messy and interesting and complicated. Before we get onto any of that stuff, though, it was interesting that you said you wrote a screenplay. I was kind of, oh wow, because one of the things I was saying to Liz while I was reading the book, and I was saying to my family, is reading this book, it's fun because as I'm reading it, I seem to be able to visualize it as a film and see a film in my head. So I'm reading the story, but I'm also seeing, oh yeah, he's going into a stadium, or he's out on these lonesome trails running, or he's sitting with his own thoughts, and I can see the sort of the screenshots in many ways.
Mhm.
So that explains a little bit why I'm doing that
Yeah.
for this. And really, I guess it's I hope you take that as a compliment to your craft. And I've actually got right at the end of our list of questions, when is the film coming out? And who would play the lead character Russ in the film?
Ah, well, shall I jump to those answers at this point? Yeah, sure.
Please do.
Yeah, so just I am working with someone on a screenplay. It is not ready yet, but it's coming along. And a screenplay is very much different than a novel, I've learned. I've never written a screenplay before except my initial amateur attempt, but now I'm working with somebody who's actually a screenplay writer. So it's a different process, it's a different mindset. I won't try to get into all of it because I don't really know that much about it other than what I'm learning as I go. But yeah, I have a hope that someday it will be made into a movie. My style of writing, I always kind of thought of as cinematic, if you will. My method of writing is to think about scenes. So, an opening scene, the development of what happens, and then a resolution that makes the reader, or if you're in a movie that setting, want to go see what the next episode looks like, what the next scene looks like, what's going to happen, leave the reader or the viewer on the edge of their seat. And as far as who would play parts, as far as Russ, the main character, I feel very strongly that whoever it is, they would need to be, if not an elite runner, at least a national class, Division One, if you're in the U.S., runner. And all of the characters in the movie who run would need to be of that caliber. I think it would be a real disservice to my idea to have people, just because they're good actors or just because, or for any other reason, play these parts and then pretend to run at an elite level. This book is about people who are extraordinarily fast at the top of their game. I mean, really at every stage, and even as a young man, the main characters. So I don't know who that magical person is who would be able to be an elite runner, but also have the chops to be a good actor.
Sure, it exists.
Ingleton comes to mind. That would be amazing. But you know, there are a lot of other top runners.
Yeah, this
And
is a call. This is a call out to Cole Hawker,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
Olympic gold medalist, and by the time we get the screenplay up and ready to roll, he'll have developed his maturity to a point where he's a 10,000-meter runner instead of a miler, and
Yeah.
then you'll have everything you need.
I thought about maybe if I could find a either the New Balance team or the Nike
Yeah,
team or
yeah,
another one of the shoe teams, they could use all their runners because it's going to take
yeah,
a lot of characters to for the big races, and so
yeah.
there's that. And then I have some ideas about who should play the various other parts, but I don't need to get into that because they're famous people, and the chances of that happening are very low.
It's
Uh,
nice to dream, though.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah,
why not?
and here we are giving you your podcast break, so we want invites to the premiere when it screens, Brad.
You've got it.
We're going to be hitting you up for those.
So I guess before we get into like other questions, we can talk about, the main character Russ, and then there were the two other they were also kind of main characters, but they just had like less room in the book. Were the twins that were in Russia, so Sergey and
Mishka.
Mishka.
Mishka, that's it. So what was the inspiration for those three characters? Like
Yeah.
why Russ? Why did he grow up in Kansas? And why were these other athletes Russian?
Okay, great. So for Russ, he's, as I said before, he's somewhat autobiographical. I grew up in central Ohio. I did most of my running in central Ohio, which is not too different than Kansas. And I grew up in a small town, much like the fictional Athens, Kansas. So I was able to draw on all of that. The pharmacy. These are all real things out of my past. What the track was like. The characters in the town are based on a lot of people I know, friends I had. A lot of the instances that Russ experienced growing up in that town, racing his buddies to the Dairy Queen, or um, doing the whole scene. There's a scene where he's running on the track, and the high school football team is there. Um, uh, all these things are drawn from my personal experiences. Including the high school races. Um, when Russ gets a little bit older and he leaves home, he goes off to college and then ultimately sequesters himself in the desert with Brad Coy to train, and that's more fictional. There are still some scenes in college that I drew on. My best friend is a guy named Al Meeker, who you'll recognize as a character
Yeah,
in the book.
yeah. I saw his name in the
Yeah.
acknowledgements and thought, aha, he has a credit.
Yeah, Al is still my best friend, and we ran together in college. The scene where he I forget which character wakes the other one up at 2 o'clock in the morning and says, "Let's go for a run." That's a true story. All these things I drew on for the character Russ. And then, as I think I said earlier in the questioning, where Russ goes with that when he gets to the desert and he's trying to find out what his limits are, it was my fictional way, my fant- fantastical way of trying to figure out what my limits were. I would never, of course, I don't have the physical capability to run anything like what these characters did, but that's not the point. Everybody,
Mm.
regardless of where you are as a runner, what level you are, you're always wanting to find out where that ragged edge is and whether you can get past it and what are the things that you must do in order to find that edge and then get past it are what I enjoyed playing with in this story. As far as the two twins, I liked the idea of two people who had essentially the same DNA and you would think would have essentially the same capabilities as runners, but who were distinguished from their successes by their mental experiences and how they were influenced growing up. So I loved exploring, their background within their family, their mother Maria and their father Vasha, and how those dynamics in a family with two sons and two parents could impact a person and what they could be. And then ultimately, whether these two characters who are very similar and obviously loved each other were pitted against each other by their coach, Grimlov. So the Russians, for me, represented the scientific side of training where you have a lot of data, you have a lot of scientific information you're working on in order to find out what your limits are, and that's what their coach was driven by data and manipulation, and as you know, in some degree by doping. And Russ's story is a much different story, and it's about the spirituality of running and finding out what those limits are through that. His is very non-scientific, non-specific, but more driven on being able to overcome the mental barriers that can hold you back.
It a bit reminds me of just in the world of running now. You have the North American athletes like us, with our GPS watches and our, all the other data, our heart rate monitors and all these things that we're using to try and see if we can somehow squeeze out an edge. And then on the other side of the world, you've got like the Ethiopians that, barely run with a watch. They just go out hard and see how long they can hang on. And they're the ones that are like the best in the world. Um, and most of the time, they don't define their paces by a pace, they define it by a feeling. It almost seems like those three, well, I guess those three characters, but those two worlds are almost like the two worlds that we see in running because, that's sort of how we've been, here we're all about the data, but actually we're finding more and more that maybe we need to go into like the psychology of running.
How liberating would that be to be untethered to your watch and instead every time you go out find what your limit is without having to reference it. And I think that there are a few scenes in the book that where that culminates. One is the race where Russ is supposed to be a rabbit and completes his rabbit duties, but then continues on because he's learned the secret. He's learned that I forget the line, but what would a race? Every race has a beginning and every race has an end, but what if there were no finish line?
Yeah, it's just it was really interesting because his time in the desert, I found that like I think it was 7 lessons that he learned. I don't know if I'm getting it right, but like I remember seven. I didn't write them down, but his time being coached by Brad, he was learning 7 lessons, and it seems like they were all to do with like mental barriers and not so much the physical barriers.
Right.
So I don't know, did you draw from are these lessons that like you had to learn, or did you draw from any like sports psychology or anything like that?
These were not from sports psychology, more based on my personal experiences and in trying to figure out for myself looking back when I was a highly competitive college runner, what things I would need to do in order to prepare for a race. Um, and I drew on all kinds of things. There's actually a scene in there where Russ is talking about what it's like when you're swimming underwater and you don't know where the end of the pool is. That came from, I mean, I used to hang out with my buddies. One of my friends had a pool and was fortunate enough to go over to his house when I was a kid and hang out there a lot. And we, of course, as kids would make up games. And one of the games we made was who could have the record for swimming underwater the longest.
Oh my gosh, we used to do that all the time, but
I
at
think we've
the
all been there.
yeah, at the public pool, which was like 25 yards or 25 meters, I don't really remember.
Right.
But yeah, we would see like how far you could get to the other end. And I remember like my biggest success swimming was like when I could swim the whole way underwater without coming up for air. I felt like I was like the best swimmer ever, but I never was really good at swimming, but I could hold my
Well,
breath really long.
but you remember that from that, Liz, that, it wasn't your physical ability that controlled how far you could go, but it was rather whether you could shut out all the voices saying, get air, come to the surface, no matter what, and how you just had to continue pushing on. And that edge, once you got to that point, if you could, and I felt like I did when I was a kid, get to the end of the pool, turn around. Can I get another lap in? Can I get to the other end? He didn't have a 25-meter pool in his backyard, but
No.
it's like, can I get to the other end? If I do, can I turn around? And then there came a point when you're doing that where you're swallowing your own air. You want to go further. You're pushing and pushing and pushing. And, you remember the line of stakes, the test of the stakes in the desert,
Yep.
where Russ and Brad are trying to find out that same limit. That's where that came from. The smashing of the watch. Heck, I'm a runner. I've got a Garmin. I push it on. I'm obsessive about it. I stop at a stoplight. I turn it off. I turn it back on again when I run. But I know how crazy that is, how ridiculous it is or can be. And there's a place for it. But so yeah, all those lessons really came from my personal experience and thinking about what makes a difference.
I think we see in the book a lot of real running knowledge, so training knowledge, and I think one of the things that's very cool as runners reading it is you see a training program or you see some splits in the book and you go, yeah, they're real. This guy knows what he's talking about. These are real. This is real stuff. The experience that they're having in training is real and authentic. And similarly, you hear running history. So he's carrying around a book on Emil Zatopek, as a character and an influence,
And the book is real.
percolates percolates out of the book Today We Die Little. We covered it on the podcast with
Richard
Richard
Asquith.
Asquith. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you see all of these things, and then there's a blending into, oh, is this training stuff that he's doing now? Is it real or is it like an extension? And you go into fiction, and similarly, the history goes into some sort of fictional part as well. I think, we see Russ running in the pre-classic at the Bauman Mile. And you go, yeah, I can see that on TV. And you see Pacers, and you go, okay, he's one of
He
those guys.
froze.
So you see that, and then you see an Olympic cycle in the book, or two Olympic cycles in the book, which are fictional,
Mhm.
effectively. Um, you have an Olympics in Sao Paulo and an Olympics in Helsinki. Why did you choose those places in particular? We kind of know, Liz and I would kind of know why you would choose Helsinki, but
Yeah. Oh, well, Helsinki was because that's where Zatopek did his triple. Um,
in
and
52.
and yeah, and I wanted to have part of Russ's obsession with Zatopek, and after he learned about him in high school from Doug, his original coach as a young man, and the inspiration he got from that. And now, at some point when he goes through a lot of trials and tribulations, he's trying to figure out what to do with his life. He's carrying the Zatopek book around, and I think there's a scene there where he goes back to Oregon to hopefully be coached by his old college coach, and he has formulated in his mind that he's going to go for the triple. And he's decided if he's going to do the triple, it has to be in Helsinki, where Zatopek did it. And coincidentally, that's when the next Olympics is going to be. And so that all made sense and flowed. Sao Paulo, I just picked that out of the air. Didn't have anything to do with anything. It's a place where I knew there hadn't been an Olympics,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
and I just felt like I didn't want to have people diverted and thinking, well, that's not like the XYZ games or anything. I just
Yeah.
wanted to fictional placement.
Okay. I'd quite like to pick your brains on the background of Russ's coach and Sergei and Misha's coach. That would be Brad Coy
Yes,
and Grimlov. In the book, there's explanations of their backstories because they have history. So not only are there these athletes, but these coaches in the background that have reason to have some sort of animosity towards each other, or they have history in running, and you explain the history. The thing that leapt out at me, and I want to check if this is true or not, was the 1976 Montreal Olympic Marathon.
mhm.
Is that
That was in the back of my mind for sure. And
okay?
Serpinski,
Yep.
um,
So Waldemar
as a,
Sierpinski from East Germany came from nowhere and beat the absolute dominant U.S. Runner Frank Shorter, 76 at the Montreal Olympics. Liz and I come from Montreal, so we know probably a little bit more than your average person about the Montreal Olympics. And it sounded like that was the inspiration for the backstory of your two coaches.
it was, and of course I embellished it quite a bit. And
Yeah,
I personally don't know whether Serpinski doped or not, but it seems that the prevailing opinion from a lot of people is
yeah,
that because of the East German programs at that time, it was likely not a coincidence that he suddenly came from nowhere and was able to beat the best marathoner in the world, Frank Shorter. You're holding up his book now. Um, and of course, I've always been a fan of Frank Shorter and followed his career, which would just coincided with the times. His peaks of his career coincided when I was really training significantly in college. So yeah, I drew on that, and I started to envision what would happen to these two characters, fictional characters, somewhat real life characters, if they were to meet up again someday in the future. And I also um, love the idea of my character Brad Coy walking away from it all, because what was more important to him than the medals and the times was competing fairly with someone who wasn't cheating. And when he came to I think there's a little of the Lance Armstrong story in here as well,
mm,
when he realized that everybody was cheating, or at least a lot of the people were cheating. He just said, I'm done with this. That's not why I'm running. That's not why I'm trying to find out what my limits are. And he
mm,
went to the desert at that point. And there's a very small section in the book, but one of my favorites in thinking about is this guy who was at that time one of the top marathoners on the planet, if not the top marathoner, going out into the desert, training and running without a watch, but knowing he's breaking world records as he runs alone with no stadium, no no one watching, no one timing, and that feeling. And I remember a few times myself when I was training where I'd be out on the road and I had limitless energy, limitless ability to continue to accelerate, feeling like I was almost sprinting, even though it was an 8-10 mile run. And feeling that I was probably breaking. This is before we had garments, you know, feeling that I was running a PR for some portion of that race or that training section, which wasn't a race. And that whole concept was kind of exciting to me.
Yeah, I have to say that that comes across in your book on several occasions. Probably this little discussion could be, what sort of emotional reaction do we have to your book? On several occasions, I'm reading you describing some running, and I'm getting little hairs standing up on the back of my neck because I've been there, in the finest moment when the stars align, and I don't know, the endorphins are just kicking in, and the fatigue flows away. You
And you
you're
just
in
feel like you could do it
you're just in
forever.
running nirvana, and you live for those moments, and you're trying to get back to those moments, and I could really feel it in some of your writing. So if you're a runner, you should get yourself a copy of this and read it so you can experience that. And I think Liz also had some emotional reactions. She was saying, I think before we pressed record, she was saying she wasn't expecting to be in tears at several stages during the process as well,
Yeah.
because of
I
the
guess we
relationships, I
won't,
guess.
yeah, we won't talk about that because it'll just let, give away everything. Or it's just gonna give away that I'm like, a
This
bit
you're a
of
big
a
softie.
like but yeah, I think yeah, it's like you really feel the relationships in the book. I feel like, you feel the human connection when you're reading about it, and the nuances of it, like just the when he had that roommate that he just got along with, they just became buddies and woke each other up at 2 a.m. for a run. And
Mm,
the roommate was like, "Are you crazy? It's 2 a.m." But then he went anyway. And the complicated relationship he had with his dad. And I guess, yeah, the complicated relationship that the twins had, where they really loved each other, but they were, one of them felt like the other one was a favorite. So yeah, it
yeah.
was
Who was your favorite character in the book, Liz?
I think I really liked Doug was the coach for
Hmm.
Russ. I felt like Doug, like he I feel like he was a runner and then he wasn't like he went to the army or something and lost a leg and so he wasn't a runner, but like I think that whole adversity and rediscovering himself as an athlete
Hmm.
after like many years, and just the fact that because we always hear that people can't change, but I felt like with him and his wife, like they had this special relationship where he was allowed to be the way he was, but eventually she put her foot down and he was able to change and he was able to overcome all of his own insecurities because it was all in his head. Well, not all in his head, obviously, but like he had trauma, but I felt like he was kind of what I want to be. Like I don't want to be limited by the things that I've done or not done in the past. Like I want to be like I like that idea of being able to become something better, whatever that means, because that could mean a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. But yeah, I like Doug.
That's
You,
cool.
you want
Yeah.
my do you want my take?
I
My
would
f-
love it.
my my favorite character in the book is Brad Coy, the guru coach of Russ. Um, and
He
the
was he
reason
was quite smart.
and the reason being that Brad Coy is an amalgamation in my head, an amalgamation of Steve Prefontaine and Yoda.
That's great.
There's definite elements of Yoda from Star Wars. You know, when Luke goes to, is it Dagobah or one of those weird planets? And it's just a swamp, and Yoda's kind of living in the swamp, and nobody knows anything about him. And he says, "Teach me to be a Jedi." And that's kind of the scene almost with Russ and Brad Coy. Brad Coy is effectively Yoda. He has all these secrets that he's kind of a nobody. Nobody knows him, but he understands the secrets of running in a way that transcends your average coach's ability.
Yeah.
And then most people just thought he was crazy.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, well, I liked all those. I love those characters. I actually love all the characters in their own way, even Grimlov.
Grimlove. Yeah,
But the when I walked away from the book after I wrote it, and actually have a sequel I'm working on, um, the character that I am going to base the sequel on is Sergei. I want to find out what happened to Sergei at the after, and that's a spoiler
yeah,
to give away what happened, so I'm not going to talk
yeah,
about it. But what happens after that, at the end of the book, it my concept is that all of the other characters will, of course, still be in the book, in the sequel, but
yeah.
it will center around this complicated man.
Yeah.
And
Complicated is a good way to put it.
It is, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because he
What
was
you think you're going to get to begin with is not what you get.
no.
Okay, well, look forward to that one. We're going to do podcast
Yeah,
number two.
definitely. I guess it'll also have a running theme because, he
it's
was a run.
interesting. Yeah, the book, I mean, oh, and there's Lauren. We've forgotten, we haven't talked about her, but
Mm,
and so high jumping is another thing that I enjoyed writing about, even though I wasn't a high jumper. But when you say it's about running, I think initially when I wrote the screenplay, I thought it was about running. I thought it was about the racing and the training and the running.
mm,
But when I turned it into a novel, I realized it really doesn't have, I mean, it has to do with running, but I was,
yeah,
I, I think it has a lot to do with life. And I think a lot of the lessons that are learned in the book are lessons that apply to everybody's lives, even being a front runner, even not looking over your shoulder and letting your past and what might be chasing you control what you're going to do in the future, but rather to keep your eyes ahead and again look for your limits and try to
yeah.
find out what those are.
I have to say that one of the things I said to Liz was I was kind of disappointed there wasn't more pages on the some of the Olympic events.
I told Alan that you
Oh,
probably have to cut like 50 pages from that because
yeah, but
your
you already
editor
had a
was
400-page book, I guess. So, um,
No, I actually made that choice. You're talking about the various heats
yeah,
at the end of the book.
yeah,
Yeah. And I felt like, maybe I was wrong. It's interesting to hear you say that. I felt like um, I was concerned about redoing the feelings and the emotions that were already explored in other races, even if they weren't Olympic races. The runoff
hmm,
against the guy in high school, for one lap, the high school meet where Russ had to qualify in order to get to the state meet, um, cross country races. I tried to dive into what it was really like to be racing in all those, and I felt like when I got to the Olympic ones that I didn't want to rehash
yeah,
again and again the same kinds of things. I couldn't come
yeah,
up with anything else new. I already had somebody falling. I had, all these events that
yeah.
occurred. So,
I
you know,
guess I love the feeling of reading and mentally watching the racing parts that I just wanted more of it towards the end. So That's
Thank you.
just my. I mean, Liz did say, "Yeah, Alan, but you're a runner." That's why. That's why
Yeah.
you. Yeah, people who are
They,
reading it who are not runners are not going to want to hear, you know, endless detail about how a race unfolds.
yeah, they're more invested in the relationships, and then, at the end they'll be probably cheering for someone, but they don't need the account of the 10,000 meter to last, like, 15 pages.
Yeah. Although I have had some readers come to me and say, I'm not a runner, but I loved, maybe I'll be one now, or um,
Hmm.
I didn't know anything about this, or what runners go through in order to reach this level. And they found it interesting, even though they read it more, hopefully, for a literary content rather than the sports fiction side of it.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
works. It works from that point of view.
I think also, like, running, like, has this image to, people that don't run, like it's just this, lonely sport, but it is actually a team sport, and you build a lot of relationships, and I guess because you're all kind of suffering the same way, it's a little different than I guess other sports where it's a team and you have to be part of a team to play. In this, you can, in running, you can start off by yourself. And even if you're not, in a traditional team, you do end up like creating bonds and camaraderie if you go to like local races all the time. Year after year, you'll see the same people. And I think that's probably surprising to most people, how many relationships you actually build when you're a runner.
Mhm.
Um, they think it's kind of just, forge ahead on your own on the roads for hours on end, and you have no time for your social life.
Yeah, no, some of my best friends and relationships are come from running. And of course it goes beyond that after you get to know somebody, but getting out on the road and sharing um, the stories and then the pain that goes along with, hard training is really forms a bond that
Yeah, I mean it's shared endeavor, isn't it? I mean, runners can identify with that, but probably people who were in the army together probably say the same. People who are in a football team together would probably say the
right.
same if they're in good ones
hmm
Mhm.
with the right experience. One of the things, trying to give a little bit more content without giving too much away. One of the things I enjoyed immensely uh, in the early stages of the book was when Russ enters his first ever race, and he kind of enters it as a bandit, and you go,
Mhm.
"Ooh, that's a bit naughty.
He doesn't
Um,
know that though.
that might not, that
Poor
might not
little
go down
Russ.
too well." And I rather feel that and he sort of jumps into the race because he can't resist. He realizes he shouldn't be doing it because he can't get an entry. And then he just can't resist it. And he's just driven by, I need to go. So he just goes, like almost like I don't know, an animalistic type reaction. And I think that the section or the chapter, the story there could have gone wrong for so many reasons because he's in a race. He's not supposed to be in the race. And then he finds himself near the front. And then he finds himself right at the front and he's approaching the finish line. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm not sure how this is going to go down with runners looking at this. But, frankly, the way you handled it was perfect. Um,
Thank you.
I don't know if I don't know if I should tell our
Oh, I
listeners
think it's
kind of
fine.
what
Yeah,
happens.
sure.
Maybe,
Yeah.
um, basically, if I read it my memory serves me correctly, Russ ended up in the lead in front of these crack local runners, I guess,
Mhm.
but ahead of them. And then he realizes, well, he hasn't actually entered the race. So he pulls off and he misses, he ducks the finish line. So he came first. And I think that the guys who saw him do that knew that he'd beaten them fair and square. Basically, afterwards, he sees I think it's the winner's medal pinned to a roadside post. Correct me
He,
if I'm wrong, Brad.
yeah, no, he runs off the course at the fairgrounds because I think he realizes probably shouldn't, having jumped into the race without registering and everything, probably shouldn't be there. And he really doesn't know what to make of, quote, winning. So he leaves and then he runs home. Um, And as he's running home down along the road, um, the two guys who he beat pull up in a car and offer him a water, and one of them, and then they pull ahead, and he sees the I think it's a Volkswagen van stop at the road, and he sees some activity. And when he gets up there, they've hung the winner's medal from a nail on a telephone pole. And what I loved about that was that the idea that, he appreciated that, but he left the medal there and they went home because for him, it wasn't about winning or the medals. And that was the beginning of that theme that kind of runs through the book at other stages. And now I'm not going to say what happens at the end of the book with respect to that
For sure.
particular.
But what happens at the end of the book is also a little bit reflected in the story from Emil Zatopek.
Ah, yes, it is. I did heavily borrow from that, but hopefully change it enough so that those who know, found something a little bit different in it than that story.
Absolutely. And I think we keep coming back to it, but this for me is the appeal because there's so much real world wrapped into the fictional story. It makes it so believable, and you get so involved with it.
Especially the complexity of all the characters, because at the beginning you're like, well, I don't like this. I don't like this coach. This coach guy, he's bad news. But I think he's nobody is all good or all bad. They just, I guess, go down the wrong path and then have a hard time turning around to come back and try again. Because I think that like initially it's almost like he goes into the relationship with the twins as like the twins are like his to use for something. But I think that, he does end up liking the twins a lot. But yeah, it's almost like,
Yeah.
he has to talk himself out of it, like no, they're just mine to use for a purpose.
I think the impression I got was the Russians are sort of, to begin with, I guess we're biased being North Americans, but the Russians are sort of portrayed somewhat as the villains. And then the more that you read the book, you start to feel that it's more the regime that is
Yes,
villainous, and the
It's not
individuals
the
are just,
people.
yeah, they're just normal people that are the same as the other people in the story, but they're in a regime that's controlling them in a different way.
thank you,
And
Alan.
it gets more complicated. It
Yeah,
makes it more fun. I
yeah.
have a question. I have a question for Liz, actually. I never, I never do this usually in podcasts, but you see what you've done to us, Brad. Um, Russ, in the story, Russ, the lead character, we haven't talked that much about really, but get the book and you'll see all about it. He has a lot of women figures in his life, but his mother is not. He meets various female figures throughout, like who kind of look after him or are interested in him. But his mother is not actually present, and his love interest doesn't seem to work out, even though she's a very hot high jumper. Again, well done, Brad, with the high jumpers. We all know how they look. So the big relationships with Russ are with his father, and Russ with his coach, and Russ with his best mate, and they're all guys. So maybe I could ask Brad, but I should ask Liz. Is it a book for is it a book for the boys? Because all relationships are boy to boy type.
I think like yeah, okay, so yeah, I guess the book is a lot of, male relationships and it's so you have the sort of, I guess I'll say it's seen as stereotypical, like men don't talk about their feelings and all these kinds of things are kind of in the background. Um, but I would say that women are kind of like they can be the same, because you do also have women that don't really, I guess, express what they really mean, or have a difficulty to express what they really want, from their relationships. It's just I think that, on the surface it's sort of different, like in the way that it's visually expressed, or I don't know how you want to say that, but women might not want to confront each other, so they'll, try and not talk about certain things or what have you, but then sometimes, they'll talk to other women about it. Men, they tend to a bit do the same thing, but like it's different, they'll do it over a beer or whatever. So I don't know. Like I think it's a book for both genders, even though like women are not really represented in it so much, except for, there's a few that come into Russ's life to sort of, I guess, guide him along the way in a more gentle way. But yeah, I mean, I think like that complexity is present in both genders. So I think, it's okay if they're not the main
Let's get the
characters.
real answer from Brad.
Well, no, that was a good answer. And I think that I'm not a woman. So, and I'm the author. So I felt that would be false for me to try to write any of it from a woman's perspective. It
Hmm,
was, it was,
that's fair.
yeah. No, I felt I was likely to get it wrong or make a mistake that would be transparent. And I wanted the book to be interesting and appealable to women as well as men. I do have a lot of women in the book who appear. They're not necessarily central figures, although I think Russ's mom, even though she's she's throughout the book,
Yeah, she's
there
a massive influence, that's for sure.
she's a massive influence. Thank you. And then there's Dot, who's one of my favorite characters. She says she's not a seer, but she is, and then there's Molly, who I love. And I actually wrote Molly for my wife in case it ever gets made into a movie. She's an actor, and I want her to play the part of Molly. There's Amy, Doug's wife. There's Lauren, the love interest, and then there's Chuck's girlfriend at the beginning of the book. Doesn't have a big role in the book,
Tiffany.
but Tiffany, but there's a a reason for that scene. And then, of course, if you recall, near the end of the book, there's a resurrection, if you will, where all the women come together in a spiritual way and um, and come to him to Russ when he's traveling back from the Olympics back to the ranch to reunite with Brad and someone he's has another spoiler. Someone else, one of the women comes back to have a relationship with Brad. But anyway, that I felt that the female influence on Russ was as powerful as the male influence, but maybe not as overt is maybe another way of thinking about it. So I don't know. To me, there, if women like love stories, men like love stories too. But I think it's a love story. Though that that's the way I looked at the whole thing.
Yeah, I also figured that maybe because you based Russ on some of your autobiographical sort of situations, that you might have a really hard time explaining to your wife who this hot redhead high jumper was. So I think you dodged a bullet there by by writing the book the way you wrote it.
She was fine. She liked Lauren.
I'm sure she did.
Yeah, I liked Lauren too. Lauren seemed like she had a good head on her shoulders, and it seemed like there was more to her than was expressed in the book. Like she was, she had some, I don't know, I guess intuitive ways of dealing with Russ, and when she went to go visit Russ and his dad. So there was more to her, but like we didn't really learn too much about it, seems like. Yeah.
I have an idea for kind of bringing out more about her in the sequel.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's some definitely some untold stories there. I'll look forward to
Yeah.
that. Getting the getting the juicy details of what went on. How did you decide what sort of cover to put on the book? Because it's very, I guess it's distinctive,
Yeah,
and it
thank
looks
you.
like it looks like it's chosen,
Yeah, it was
not
chosen.
just random.
Kudos to my publisher. my publisher is owned by a woman named Dee Dee Cummings, who lives in Vermont, and she started a small press called Green Writers Press about 5 or 6 years ago. She used to be a literary agent and decided to start her own publishing company. But when she was in the book industry, before she had her own company, she was a book designer as well.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
mhm. And so, I mean, I have a copy of it here. I can, oh, nobody's watching this, so there's no point in showing it. But the I we went around and around on the cover. I had a lot of ideas. I had an idea of a guy that was covered with white chalky material, naked runner running across the desert. And I actually found a wonderful photograph of that a woman who's a musician was had in her video, and I contacted her, and she just never got back to me about whether I could use it. And so I searched more and more. As you know, the cover is kind of a muddy path through to a cornfield into the distance with the dark clouds hovering overhead, but a bright light on the in the horizon. And that all relates to the scene where Russ
Mm.
runs through the corn after he has a certain experience, and then I think a breakthrough with his father afterwards. And I just I picked that picture from a stock photo source, but my publisher Dee Dee was able to really make it an amazing enhancement, and wrap it around to the back page, which I thought was fantastic. And then, if you, I don't know if you open the inside, but there's an embossed
It's an embossed runner.
there's an
Mm.
embossed runner on the inside cover, and that was Dee Dee's idea as well. And just, the color of the cloth bound and the typeface and the buff paper and everything. I just was thrilled actually with that. The day the books arrived from the printer, I got, a few hundred of them delivered to my house, and the pallet was there at the end of my driveway. And when I opened the books up, I was just like blown away, just blown away. Such a thrill.
That's amazing. That
It's
must be
like a
like the
kid, like
best
a
feeling
kid
in the
at
world. Yeah.
Christmas. That's what I call
I
it.
mean, we get really excited when we open our mailboxes and
Yeah, when we get two in the post from you, we get all excited and dance around. So having a
yeah.
pallet load, that must be fun. There's no runner. There's no runner on the front though. Very interestingly, I mean, nearly everybody who writes a running book has a runner somewhere on there.
Yeah,
I guess he kind of has one, but it's hidden by the cover because it's on the front
Uh,
on the hard cover, but it's not on the cover cover. I mean, it's not on the sleeve, whatever you call that.
the wrapping or something. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I just every time I thought about having a runner on the cover, I think you're right. I just felt like, unless it was really dramatic, like the one I had envisioned originally of this person, almost like a ghost-like figure sprinting across the sand, with the blazing sun in the
hmm.
background, and maybe the blue sky overhead. And
I find also that if you're looking at those stock photos, like a lot of the running stock photos are kind of the same but different. So,
I,
so I kind of understand why you were hesitant.
I think the cool thing for me is you could imagine that you are the runner.
hmm,
So you're looking at it rather than saying, "Oh, there goes Russ
yeah,
on his sprint through the cornfields." You can actually go, "Here are the cornfields, and I'm feeling like it's me running through there."
yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a great observation I didn't think of.
Great. So, if you wanted to recap, like big overview, what do you hope people get from the book?
I think I touched on it earlier, but I think it's the theme that it's the fear of what's ahead that holds people back, both in running and in life. And that's what distinguishes a front runner from the hanging kicker in life as well. You can hang on and forget about running, but you can hang on and be just behind other people who are forging the way, who are clearing the path, who are breaking the barriers, who have nothing in front of them but opportunity. And you can hang behind them on their shoulder the whole way in your life or in running, or you can be a front runner and find out what your limits are and not have them dictated by what other people's perceptions and capabilities are. So to me, that was the central theme of the book is it's fear of what's ahead that holds us back from everything. If you can learn to overcome that fear, then the possibilities are limitless.
There's definitely truth to that. In terms of the book, are there any plans for the book? Do you have like a book tour lined up or anything like that?
Great question. So I launched the book at the Boston Marathon in last April.
Very good. That sounds like a great place to watch a book.
There's
The
one or two
palette
runners there.
Yeah.
the palette of books that arrived at my house arrived on April 13th. And the Boston Marathon, I think it was either the 15th or the 16th
Hmm.
last year. And so my wife and I packed it all up, and my publisher showed up, and we had a booth, and so we I'm actually quite an introvert, so having to step out in front of hundreds, thousands of runners streaming by and try to induce them to come over and talk about my book or look at it was quite an experience, but I got used to it. I think the expo was 3 days, and I thoroughly enjoyed that experience. And one of the things that I always wanted to do if I ever wrote a book was, how the author will sign a person's book that they purchase from you.
Yeah.
I've had I don't know, you can't probably see this, maybe you can.
Yeah.
I've had,
Oh,
Oh, we did. Yeah.
I've
yeah.
had every person who I've personally interacted with respect to my book, either buying it or even just coming by at the expo, sign my version. So
Okay,
Oh,
so you got
wow.
a reverse dedication.
That's
yeah,
amazing.
I have hundreds and hundreds of signatures in this book, and it ranges from people from China who wrote in Chinese, a guy
That
from
is so
Belgium.
cool.
I've got couples. I've got people who were doing their 50th marathon and wrote on page 50. People who are doing their first marathon and wrote on page 26. I've got Bill Rogers' signature. I've got and a small note from him. I've got Amby Burfoot. I've got Neil Cusack. I've got people I've known in my past. People wrote their times down. Uh, Everybody had a nice little. I've had a 10-year-old sign this. It's one of my cherished possessions. Well, it probably is
Very
this
cool.
book. And I take it with me everywhere. That began the Boston Marathon began that. I did a few readings locally. I did another expo at the Vermont City Marathon in Burlington, Vermont, which you may be familiar with.
Yep. I've done the Vermont City Marathon in Burlington.
Okay, well, I've done it too, so we may have interacted at one
Yeah.
point. I've donated the book to a woman who is giving of her time and helping women prisoners learn to run, even a mile or less than a mile. That's their goal, is to be able to run a mile. But I've donated a bunch of books to them. I donated a bunch of books to a high school cross country team here in California, where I am right now.
Oh, wow.
I did a book reading at the Tattered Cover, which is a pretty famous bookstore in Denver, Colorado. 3 people came. So
Oh, I guess
yeah,
the word didn't get out over there.
No, it's, you know what? Writing the book was one thing. Getting it in people's hands is quite another proposition.
A different skill, yeah.
Yeah, it's a different
Yeah,
beast.
if you're with one of the big five publishing companies, they can pick up the phone and call someone from the New York Times or USA Today
Yeah.
and say, please read this book and do a review. I don't have that capability. My publisher doesn't have those
Hmm.
kinds of connections. So this is a slow burn. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and it's on Goodreads and things like that. I've entered some competitions. I recently got runner up for best sports book in one of those. But without major publicity, it's really, really difficult to get the word out. People, hopefully so far everybody who's read it has liked it except one person. On Goodreads, for some reason, someone gave me a 1 star.
Oh,
Huh.
congratulations.
Yes.
You got a one
And
star review. Liz,
and they didn't
Liz has been trying
Uh,
really hard to get us 1 star reviews on Spotify for our podcast.
and they didn't even leave a review. And I
Oh,
and I,
Oh,
I
see?
actually I actually figured out who it is,
Oh,
and I wrote
okay.
to them. I don't know the person, but I figured out who it was because I was able to do that. And I wrote to them and I said, you can have your opinion, but I'm interested in knowing why.
hmm.
Because every one of my other reviews is is 5 star. I have like 4.95 if you take that
Hmm.
out.
But did they ever get back to you? Because, like, you know what, though? I think, like, so I don't know how it is with books, but I know, like, on like websites where you buy stuff, like Amazon, what people will do is they will like go and read the negative like 1 star reviews to see really like because we all know that there's always the one person that I don't know. It says don't put it in the dishwasher and they did and all the coloring came off. So like there's
Right.
always that person and they're going to leave a 1 star review. So you just go and see the reviews to see like why it was 1 star and then decide for yourself if you care or not. And basically, so I think that by giving you this 1 star review, like, yeah, it's bringing down your Goodreads average. But the thing is, like, I think most people, if they actually go in and check the 1 star reviews and they see nothing, it's like, well, this is just a grumpy Goodreads reader that just had a bad day and woke up
Hmm.
on the wrong side of the bed. So, I don't know. Hopefully that's kind of how it is, but I don't know. That's sort of what I think will happen with that. I love I love Goodreads, but for books and stuff, like, because Goodreads doesn't actually sell books. So, I don't know how much people go to Goodreads to before they buy the book or anything like that. I'm not really sure. I wonder
Yeah,
if it's like the Amazon reviews matter more, but um, who knows, right?
yeah.
Unless,
I think Goodreads is actually owned by Amazon. But
okay.
if you go to your Amazon page, you'll see that Amazon posts both the Goodreads ratings and the
Oh, I
info.
never noticed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what I have done to try to get the word out is I actually, of course, you guys are familiar with John L. Parker Jr.'s book, Once a Runner, and then again to Carthage and Racing in the Rain. And, those are three fictional novels about running that are, well known and viewed, certainly Once a Runner is viewed as a classic of this genre. And so I went to Goodreads and I found all the people who had left a review for Once a Runner. And I thought, well, if those people liked Once a Runner, maybe they'll like my book. And I started off contacting, trying to make connections with those
Okay.
people
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
said, if you like Once a Runner, maybe you'd be interested in this. Because I don't have the massive marketing arm, like
Hmm.
I said, of a big five. And
Yeah.
that's been really nice. It's a lot of work and I kind of ran out of steam of doing takes a lot of time to
Yeah.
to do all that. But I've gotten a lot of people who are very nice. Thanks for letting me know it. I'll check it out. And then sometimes, I'll get either a note or a review from them.
Hmm.
It has been very nice as well.
I guess if there's something we could do is maybe, given that we've read the book, leave you a review on one of the forums, Goodreads
We should
or
go to
whatever.
Goodreads to offset that 1 star with no review.
And one of the things we should do is say if you're listening to this and you're going to get yourself a copy of the book, you could do a lot worse things with your money than get yourself a copy of this book. You get very inspired, and I think you'd enjoy it a lot. And if you want to pay it back a little bit, leave a review of the book on a forum like Goodreads or on Amazon if you get it from Amazon or whatever. Do you have preferences where people should go to get the book? Can they get it directly from Green Writers?
I know we don't have an outlet there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the best place would be in bookstores. Go to your local independent
Yeah.
bookstore and ask them to order you a copy, because
Yeah.
then, the bookstore may see that there's an interest in that. Amazon is a great place to buy it. And I'll also point out there is a Kindle version, which is the digital, and there is an audio
Oh
book.
yes, I was going to ask you about the audiobook.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my wife is the narrator.
Oh,
Oh,
cool.
And,
very cool. Okay.
and there are 50 different voices. Believe it or not, we add them up at the end. Male, female, Russian, American. She and I and an audio engineer is a good friend of ours had the most wonderful time sitting in his studio, and while Anne, my wife, sat in another room, and it was so fun to watch her incorporate the characters into her own almost physical being as she gestured. She would use certain things like cross her arms when a certain character would speak, or do other things in order to distinguish between who was who. Because when you have a conversation, it's not interesting to listen to it in a monotone.
Hmm.
And I just kind of felt like she did a great job. One of the things that was a challenge was deciding whether or not it was okay to have a female reader read what you guys have pointed out are predominantly male characters throughout the book. Although the book's written from a third person, omnipresent
Yeah. A narrator.
narrator who
Yeah.
knows, yeah, who knows what everyone's doing. That could be a male or a female, but the actual characters are a lot of males. And we looked into that a little bit, and we learned that audiobook listeners much prefer having a female read male parts than having a male try to read female parts.
That's interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And she didn't really change her voice. She has a nice resonant voice. I don't think she, tried to distinguish between male and female, but it just came across pretty naturally. But I thought that was an interesting.
Very cool. So that's an option for people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
are you active on social media if people want to follow you?
Yes, I
Uh,
have my own website. It's bradfawley.com. It's an author's website. You can see a lot of stuff on there about this book. And when I
okay.
get my next one up, there'll be another. And then I have an Amazon author page, a Goodreads author page, and then on my Facebook, I have a Facebook author page. I created a Russ Clayton page,
Oh,
so I have
okay. So it's a character page.
Russ has his own character,
Oh, is there a
which
profile photo?
there's not a photo, but there's a little bio about him. And then there's my personal Facebook page, which I've tried to connect with and already had a lot of connections with a lot of runners. I have like 5,000 quote friends on that page. And that has been an amazing, the people that I've met through this process who I never knew are just amazing relationships that I've built over social media. But you guys, I know Dick Beardsley, famous marathoner, won the Boston. We got second in Boston.
Yeah.
in the famous race against Salazar, duel in the sun, you know, he invited me to come fishing with him in Minnesota. He's a fishing guide.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
Jack Welch, who you may know, is a great author. Wrote for Running Magazine, was an editor at not Track and Field's Runner's World. He's been supportive. I mean, I could go on. Mike Dunlap, who is a great marathoner from North Dakota, has become a friend, invited me to come down to his place in North Carolina. All these things that, these people that I didn't know before that read the book, and
Yeah.
They're all going to try and get parts in your movie when it comes out, Brad. That's fine.
they've already signed up. Yeah.
Well, you need a lot of runners, so that's
Okay,
okay.
great stuff. So summary for The Frontrunner by Brad Fawley. How do I start? I think I'll start with wow, what a great story. If you think it's going to be a story about a poor Midwest kid makes good, it turns out that you're wrong. You think that's how it's going to be, but it turns out to be much more complicated than that. I guess just like real life. As I said before, I kept envisaging the story as a film. So I'm reading the book, but I'm seeing a film playing out in my head. I guess Brad's explained to us it's because he's did some screenwriting around it, and also because basically the story is so engaging. There are some Olympic events near the end, which we haven't gone into because that gives the game away. Buy the book and find out for yourself. I kind of felt these were too short because I was hungering for more of the running stuff. But the running stuff that's covered is really, really well done. I loved all the racing and the training descriptions as well as the story development. On a literary scale, I think it's right up there. Anyone who likes running or a great adventure or a journey of self-discovery will love this book. Basically, if you read fiction, read this. That's kind of the most I can say about it, really.
I guess the only thing I can really add is maybe some comments about the format. The cover is it's like a nice hardcover book with I guess we kind of went over it in the episode, but it's got like a sleeve with a photo that I guess you only understand once you've read the book, which means that it was well thought out, I think. The book was really good. It's also quite long. It was like 400 pages, but I mean, I think I read it in like less than a week. And that was like, not reading like 8 hours a day or anything. Like I was, obviously I did do other things those days. So, so it just shows that I just almost couldn't put it down unless I had to. The only thing I would say is that as a problem, but maybe that's just a sign of good writing, is that I had to cry more than once, so I needed like a box of Kleenex. But I guess that might not be everybody because Alan didn't shed any tears, or at least he won't confide in me that he did. So that would just be a me problem and not a book problem. But yeah, I think it's also testament to the characters. It almost feels like you get to know them and you feel for them. That's at least how I felt about the book. And the stories had a few surprising twists. Yeah, some of that comes together at the end. Although, yeah, it was it's not really, like Alan said, it's not really just a straightforward story of a small town kid and then he gets a big break and, ends up being a great athlete or anything like that. It's a lot more of a meandering path. So I guess who would I recommend it to? I think like even if you don't read fiction or you think you don't read fiction, because I remember me saying that I don't read fiction because I just didn't have a tendency to read fiction very much. But I'd say that like you can still get something out of this. And even if it's, I'm gonna say just inspiration, but inspiration is a big thing. I think you can definitely get inspiration from the story because it's a realistic story. It's not out there. It sounds like a lot of regular people doing regular things and just stumbling their way through life and just believing that they can achieve more or do more, and trying to keep that belief alive while they're putting one foot in front of the other. So, yeah, even if you're not a fiction reader normally, I would say you could probably, if you love running, then you're going to love this book.
You guys are great. Thank you.
Maybe I need to record that for the Goodreads review that I'm gonna leave.
Yeah, just put it on type. Just type it down.
Yeah, just yeah. So yeah, should probably type that out.
I guess all that remains for us to do before we do our outro is just thank you for your time, Brad. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your book as well.
Yeah.
We both loved the book. We like all running books for different reasons, but we particularly loved this one.
The engagement factor was high, and yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've enjoyed this discussion so much. You guys, your questions are wonderful. They're probing. I could tell that you had really considered what you wanted to ask about, and you had a deep knowledge of the book. Nothing's more rewarding. I mean, I think I read something from Jane Smiley about writing, and how an author may have an idea about what they're trying to say, but every person that reads a book has their own interpretation, and every person who reads it has a different interpretation and a different feelings that are evolved from that experience. And that's the most rewarding thing for me. This is my debut novel, so if this is all I'm 70 years old, if this is all I ever do as far as getting a book published, I feel so satisfied. And the kind of reception that you guys have given me about it is just a great feeling. Thank you.
That's our pleasure.
I think that's part of the art of writing is because you don't really know how your words land to your audience. It's
Yeah.
It's like I used to work in an office setting, so we'd read a lot of emails, and we actually got a course about writing emails.
Yeah.
So things like you shouldn't write in all caps, and because it's like someone's shouting at you, and it's like, well, no, I just accidentally hit the caps lock key, and I just wrote everything in caps, and that was it. But yeah, it's like just to for us, it was just like a way to sensitize us to the idea that that the way you write things can not ensure that they're interpreted in a certain way, but like they give you a better chance of not insulting anyone, or not making anybody sad, or those kinds of things. So
Right.
so I think yeah, it must be hard to be an author, but I guess that's part of why it's an art. It's an art
I
form.
didn't find
For
it
sure.
hard at all. I loved every minute of writing it, and I have a day job, unfortunately, as a lawyer, and I'm trying to stop doing that so I can go to writing full time. My runway in life is getting shorter and shorter as every year passes,
Yeah,
and
I know how that feels.
yeah,
I think you have to ask yourself, what do you want to do with your life, and what's getting in the way of what you want to do with your life, and how much money do you need for the rest of your life?
Right.
Suddenly you can put that into perspective. Don't wait to have some kind of terrible illness that kind of makes you consider life like that. Pretend you've got it now, and go for it.
That's
Because,
good
if you have to write a 5-book series, you're going to need a bit of time, Brad. Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. A great big thank you to Brad Fawley for providing us with review copies of the book and spending valuable time with us today. If you'd like to leave us feedback about how we can improve the podcast, or you'd like to suggest a book that you'd like us to review in a future episode, please leave us a comment on social media. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. And on Twitter, we are Twitter or X. I'm still insisting on saying Twitter.
I know, me
we
too.
are reviews_running. Please also follow us on social media to find out about new episodes when they are released, or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening to us for a while and you're wondering how you can help us out, there are a few ways. If you're enjoying the podcast, spread the word. leave us a review, tell your friends, share a link. Apple Podcasts, great for short written reviews. If you're into the Apple world, we're getting a bit short of recent reviews. So come on, guys, get out there and leave us a little review. Just say okay and leave us 1 star. You'll make Liz happy. She's been determined to get us a 1-star review.
That'll just be one of those reviews nobody looks at.
Or you can rate us on Spotify out of 5 stars. We're also on a platform called Buy Me a Coffee, where we publish occasional outtakes and snippets and blogs and photos. So you can just go to buymeacoffee.com, look for a creator called Running Book Reviews, and see what we have there. You don't actually have to buy us a coffee. You can if you want, but it's all accessible free of charge. That's all for today from Running Book Reviews. Bye for now.
Bye.